This is the first of our monthly workshops. We'll have one next month and probably November and maybe not December. We like to put these on for our education students, all departments, everything in the College of Education, just to kind of get us together to talk about things that are important to us. And so that's why we're talking about writing and publishing in education today. And it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Emily Bouck, and she is the Associate Professor of Special Education in the Department of Educational Studies. And one of the things that she focuses on is improving the school outcomes of secondary students with high incidence disabilities. And she's also a publishing extraordinaire, and like she says, she's got children at home, and so how she manages to be a great mother and also publish is wonderful. So we'll let her get started, and we'll probably just keep the door open and let people trickle in, and she'll take it away.
All right, thanks. What I wanted to do before I say anything that I prepared is ask what questions you have, because I'd like to be able to tailor what I can say to meet your questions, rather than just doing it at the end in case you run out of time. I want to know what you want to know at the beginning, and then I will try to tailor what I have to say to address your needs. Does that make sense? All right, so you guys, I'm going to try to take notes in my bad handwriting, so you guys can shoot them away at me, and I will try to incorporate them as I go along.
Balancing parenting and publishing. How do you do it?
I make them learn to type in very
Transcriptions and
yes,
they're sharp.
No, that's a good one though. Mm-hmm. There must be some questions if you're here.
I guess I would want to know how I could take like something I did for class and maybe tailor it for like different publications, or what I would need to change and adjust depending on where I'd want to send it out, maybe.
How?
When we send a letter for revision to the reviewers, do we follow like a specific format, or is there other different types of format that we can use?
Okay. Well, these can get me started, and if you guys have questions, feel free to shout them out at any time. I don't have a hand-raising policy in my classes, and so feel free just to shout out any questions. I want to start off with the idea of taking what you do in class and publishing it, because this is a huge thing that I believe in. It's something I did myself as a graduate student, and it's something I firmly implement in my doctoral classes. I'm a firm believer, which, great that you're recording this, is that graduate school should not be about busy work, and if you aren't doing things that are authentic in your classes, that's a problem. And if it's not being done by the faculty, then you as a student have to take that ownership to make what you do authentic. And so in my doctoral courses, I require that students submit things, either we write things collaboratively as a small group, or they have to work individually or with a partner, and they're required to submit it for publication for a grade. They will not get a grade in the class unless they submit it to a peer-reviewed journal outlet. Because I think that there's enough to do in graduate school not to be writing just for me. I'm a firm believer that the only way to get better at writing is to write. But just like the idea of sports, you say, only how you get better is practice. But that analogy isn't correct. It's not practice makes perfect. It's perfect practice makes perfect. You don't teach students to swing a bat incorrectly and expect them to get better. You have to actually teach them correctly. It's the same way with writing. To write for an inauthentic audience doesn't necessarily make you better at writing. To write for an authentic audience makes you better at writing. And also, writing gets better when you have all the outside people looking at it and incorporate your feedback. I've become a much better writer the more reviewing I've actually done. Because the more you read other people's writing, is the more that you write, you're not just writing from a writer's perspective, but you also have the reviewer in the back of your mind. And so when I write, I don't just have that reviewer, voice talking to, the writer voice talking to me, but I have that reviewer voice going, wait a minute, as a reviewer, I wouldn't like that, or you need to think about this. And so I fully believe that my writing improved a lot when I started to review. So I know that people have different philosophies, and so there might be things in your classes, and just like there were things in my graduate classes, that weren't authentic. For example, when I was a graduate student, we had to take comprehensive exams, which we were emailed a question, which we don't do in my department. Emailed a question at like 9 in the morning. We had to email back the response at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We did this for 2 days. That's a pretty inauthentic activity in the sense of it doesn't, people just read it and then they pass you or fail you. So what I did is actually took one of my responses and I turned it into a journal article. And so it wasn't necessarily research because it was kind of synthesizing the literature on law and students with disabilities. And so I took that, shortened it down, made some tweaks, and sent it out to a journal that I knew wasn't just looking for research-based articles, but wanted to have ideas of position papers and things that would move the conversation forward. And so I think one of the things to do is whenever you're writing something is to always ask yourself, how can I make this authentic? So in your class to think, okay, so where could this possibly be? I may be writing it for this purpose, for this class, but how could I take this and to think about an authentic outlet? If I'm writing a review, why don't I make a systematic review? Systematic reviews are much more likely to get published than just reviews of the literature, right? To put that research rigor into how you do a literature review. If you want to do a literature review, if you do it in a systematic format, that has much more chances of getting published because there's a rigor to that, a research rigor to that, than just regular reviews. If you're writing something else, how can I take this and form a position, right? Position papers get published all the time. And my students a lot of times tell me, well, only people established in the field can do that. They don't know you from anybody, right? It's a blind review process. They don't know who's writing it, first of all. And if that's the editor's version of screening, it's probably not a place you want to submit anyways, because I don't believe that editors are looking for the best. Good editors are looking for the best that they can do. They're not looking to see who's publishing and publishing the particular names. What I do in my class was actually required of me. My first semester of graduate work is to get a grade, you had to submit a paper. You don't have data, so what do? So I wrote a position paper and I got it published. And so that's why I believe firmly about the idea of doing things authentic in class. And I've done that in other classes too. I had to do something, write a lit review. So I found a way to make it and tailor it and to get it published. So if it's not being done as a structure of your class, it's taking that ownership to think, okay, so what outlets exist? How can I take this and to make a contribution to the field? Not everything you're going to write in a class is going to make a contribution to the field. Some assignments, activities aren't structured like that, but some are. It's not going to happen with every single class you take, but the idea is if you can do it with 1 or 2 classes each year, that's great. That's 1 to 2 papers, right? That could potentially go into your pipeline. And so I think the big thing is to think about what contribution this makes, and then to think about what journal does this make sense at. Okay. And to kind of going in with the journal sense, I'm a believer that not everything we write goes to the top tier. I like the view of realism. I like to live in the real world. I realize not everything I write is a top tier journal outlet, and I'm not going to waste my time sending it to that because not everything I do belongs in the top tier journals. Okay, so I believe in that notion of balance. All right, so I'm not going to shoot always for the top ones. I'm going to say, you know what? This journal, this paper I'm writing really belongs into this niche. It's not to the top in my field. It may not even have an impact factor, but this is where it's A, most likely to get published, B, most likely to hit the target audience that I'm writing for. And I think that's key. I want to meet my target audience. That is my goal. My goal is to improve the in-school and post-school outcomes of students with disabilities. Therefore, I want to target practitioners who can use that and researchers who can further those ideas to, again, expand on my research to build upon it. And so those are kind of the things that go into my decision for a journal. I would like impact, but it's not the end-all be-all. I need to find the right journal for this article. I know I talk fast. If I talk too fast, please do stop me. Questions about the idea of authenticity or trying to get what you write published? I think the big thing is just you have to put yourself out there. And when I talk to graduate students, that seems to be the scariest thing. The actually pushing the send or to put it in the mail. I joke that I was once on the phone with a graduate student. I'm like, push the send. No, push send. Yes, no, I can't do it for you. We're miles away. You need to hit the button. And I realize that it's scary, and I get rejected. People get rejected all the time, and your first rejection is the worst. But after that, you kind of build up a little thicker skin, and there are strategies to handle rejection. When I get things back, and you open a little envelope with your old-fashioned, some of my journals, or you read the email, and if it says congrats, I read it. If it says we're sorry, I'm like, I'm not going to deal with you right now. I literally yeah, I'm not. You go back in the envelope, you go on my shelf. It could be 2, 3, a week later, and I'm like, I feel like I can be objective. I feel like I can deal with you and not just want to, throw things at the reviewer. And that's how I do it. If it's not accepted or revised and resubmit, I don't deal with it right away. I put it aside, I wait, and I'm like, okay, I can process. And then the first thing I literally do is I start the rejoinder letter. And I probably have the most detailed rejoinder letters, because what I do is I take every single point the reviewers say, and I put them in my own words so I own them. So then it no longer becomes somebody telling me what to do, it becomes me telling myself what to do to make a better article. But I put every little point, minor or big, that the reviewer asked in a rejoinder letter, and then I just start tackling it on the papers, and then I write how I addressed it. Or I didn't address it. Because you don't have to take every single suggestion they make. Some reviewers make absurd suggestions. I can't tell the editor I think they're absurd, but I find nice ways to be like, I disagree with the reviewer for X, Y, and Z. But my rejoinder letters can be up to 5, 6 pages, depending on the length of the number of comments they want to address. And so literally when I get back revise and resubmit, that's what I do, is I start the rejoinder letter right away so that I can put in clearly what they want me to do.
So how do you find the balance between keeping your authentic voice and still meeting the need of the reviewers? Because sometimes it's not being faithful to what you originally wanted to say.
So if it's something that I feel is fundamentally different than what my point is, I will argue that, because if I'm not going to say something I don't believe in. So if it comes down to philosophical difference, I will explain to the reader why I can't make these changes and support it. And I will just the rejoinder letters don't come back to reviewers. And all the times I've been reviewing, I've never seen the rejoinder letters. Yeah, they just apparently go to the editors. I know, it was quite astonishing to me too. I was like, why did somebody else read me? I took so much time. But the editor, so you're making a case to the editor. So I think if you philosophically different, you just spend that time, if it's a paragraph, however much it is, to explain, I'm not going to make the change and here's the reason. Just to say I'm not going to make it or we didn't do it, insufficient. I think there has to be a depth of reasoning behind that. I don't make changes that are philosophically different than what I'm trying to say. Little things, there are some things that I'm like, yeah, I'm not completely sold on this, but I do believe in picking and choosing your battles. If I look at this and I say, I'm going to make a case I'm going to not do 3 of them, and there's about maybe 2, 3 others, and I'm like, I'm going to probably do the 2, 3 others, because they're not the big points I want to make. So I'm probably pragmatic and pick and choose my battles. But I'm not going to say something, put my name on something that I don't fundamentally believe in. And so I will argue philosophical differences, and have done so successfully. Is there another question? So I lost my train of thought. But anyways, so that's rejoinder. But rejections, I let them sit. I think you got to wait until you're ready to deal with them, and that you need to decide on that length of time. One of the things I think is to not let things die until you've tried a couple places. Just because you get rejected once doesn't mean that, if you believe in the quality of the piece, doesn't mean that you should try someplace else. When I write and when I tell my doctoral students to write, I always say you need to come to me with plan A, B, and C. Okay? I want to know where you're submitting is plan A. All right? Let's say that isn't accepted. Where's your plan B? And if that gets rejected, where's your plan C? You may not like this kind of language, but this is how we're going to deal with things, because I really do try to be realistic. And so I say, let's have A, B, and C. All right? So that's kind of the plan that I work with, is the idea. Every time I'm writing something, I begin writing it generally knowing where I'm going to submit it, or know a couple options I'm going to submit it to. So that when I write from the beginning, I'm tailoring it to the journal that I believe I'm going to submit it to. All right? That includes formatting, which is page length. Because if you start to write something and you get really attached to something and it's 35 pages, and your journal max is 30, it is hard to cut those last 5 pages. I firmly believe that to write productively, you have to write with journal outlets in mind, because that gives you the audience, and you have to start with the beginning with the format, in the terms of what is the maximum pages. I don't know if you guys have ever gotten to something and had to cut a significant number of pages to get it. It's hard, right? And then I start to do all the little tricks in the book. I pretend that buzz don't really exist. You start cutting citations, and my papers all look like they're justified left and right and things like that. So it's much easier, I think, to go in knowing what you have to work with than to have to cut or add at the end. because we do get emotionally attached to what we write, and it's hard to make those changes. What are some of the other things? Balancing work and home. I think I have that, and then I'll go on to some of the other points that I had, because that was a question. Yeah.
Before
Yes,
that,
go ahead.
could you speak a little bit more about how editing, how becoming an editor actually helped your writing process?
So now I'm a reviewer.
Oh, just
Yes.
right.
So I'm on the review board for 2 journals, and then I do a lot of ad hoc reviewing when I'm asked. And I typically, unless it's like journal no one's ever heard of, typically I agree to do the reviews. First of all, I believe that doing good things will pay off in the end. Like there's some sense of karma, like this, I do this for you, then but I believe that if I have to I think that one of the problems in this country in writing K through 12 as well as in higher ed, returning graduate school, is the fact that we don't really embrace the writing process, and particularly with the revising and editing. And so before I submit something, I'm usually at version like 30, 45, so every time I open it and make major changes, I rename it. So I believe in extensive revising and editing. But one of the things that I think reviewing allows me to do is to look at another person's paper. And when I look at and I'm spending time thinking about how things, first of all, the quality that they submit, that becomes a huge thing. Like, oh wow, I can't believe they submitted this. This is nowhere near you. This is not APA ready. This isn't even in a proper article format. But also conceptually, I'm like, these ideas don't flow. There's no flow within a paragraph or across paragraphs. Okay, there's no funnel. I tell this a lot. There needs to be a funnel, right? When you write your lit review for an article, you have to have that funnel. And so as I'm reviewing those and thinking about those aspects, when I start to write, I make myself go, does this make sense? Do you have transitions? Are you having a flow? Does a funnel exist? If someone that wasn't you were to read this, would this conceptually make sense? So I look for little things and big things, and it just, I try to bring that reviewer piece into my writing so that I can try to preempt what a reviewer might say. I believe that the more that you can preempt what a reviewer is going to fault you for, the more likely you are to be successful. So if I can think as a reviewer and go, okay, if I were a reviewer, what would I say about this? And then try to fix it before I submit, I think that it can benefit me in the long run.
Does that work into writer's block at any point? I mean, I have a lot of hang-ups about, this is not, I have an idea that I have to get it on page first and then going to worry about what an editor would say later, but
people work differently. My philosophy is, because I do so much editing and revising, I get things out and then I'm like, I'm going to worry about editing it later. So I don't ever worry about crafting the perfect sentence to begin with. But I know people who do. My philosophy is I'm going to do brain dump and then I'm going to go back and spend a lot of time editing and revising. I was talking in my doctoral seminar earlier this week, and I said, I have different strategies. And so one of my strategies, which may not be great, is if it's an area that I write frequently in, I have a lot of the language already in my head. So instead of spending time looking for those citations, why I'm writing, because that slows me down, I literally just put, parentheses and put cite, because I know that I can find it, and I keep going and generate the text. And then I go back to add those in.
Right.
Because I'm like, I know that I can find citations for this, because I've written a lot about this, but I'm not going to spend the time slowing down my writing. I'm going to spend the time getting my thoughts out, organizing this, and then I'm going to go back and find the citations. Does that answer your question at all?
Yes, that
Okay.
helps a lot. Thank you.
Yes. Balancing home and work. I was lucky in the sense I never had to balance it as a graduate student. I just had to balance it as an assistant professor, which has pluses and minuses. Because I'm sure, as your faculty have all told you, it doesn't, if you think that it gets easier on the other side, unfortunately at the assistant level it doesn't. But I balance it by, I basically work the hours. I drop my children off at school, and that is something that I firmly am committed to. And unless, there's an unavoidable meeting, I drop them off and I don't come in till 9. Before I had kids, I used to be in at like 7. Now I'm in at 9. And I usually leave between 4 and 4:30 so that I have enough time to spend with them before they go to bed at 8 o'clock. That is something I believe in. And then after they go to bed, that becomes my work time again. And so what I do is I make the most of my 9 to 4. I don't go out to lunches. I don't tend to socialize in those times. To me, that's just not where my priorities are. My priorities are to be the best I can at my job and to be the best I can at home. And so I make a lot of sacrifices that to me don't feel like sacrifices, because I prioritize those two things, my children and then my work. One of the things that has worked well for me is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with this book, How to Write a Lot, by Paul Sylvia. If you're not, I highly recommend that you borrow a copy from the library or look into it. When I was an assistant professor, my department had brought him in as a speaker for our department, and then we had access to the book, and he talked about it. And one of the things that he talks about a couple things. One of the things that reiterated with me was the idea of blocking off writing time and protecting it. And so just like when you have classes you have to teach, right? You can't schedule things during those times, right? You just can't not show up to teach. The same thing is with writing time. And so that I schedule writing time, and when someone says, oh, can I meet you? My writing time is typically from 9 to 11. Can I meet you at 10? I'm like, nope, I'm busy. I already have a meeting scheduled. It's with myself, but it's the idea to protect that time. Okay, and so that's one of the ideas that he really brought forth. And so on my calendar, I schedule writing time, and to me, that's generally protected time. Unfortunately, there are a few exceptions in life, but generally, that's my time I protect. And I just tell people I'm not available. So if someone needs to meet with me, I say, here's my availability, and I don't give that time. And so every week, I try to schedule every day 2 to 2.5 hours every day that I'm devoted to writing. All right. One of the things he also did is keep data on his writing. I don't do that. Okay. He cut a spreadsheet on the number of words he wrote and things like that. That gets it a little beyond my. I just feel like that would take me more time than it would be actually worth. But that's something he did. The other thing that he recommended, which was very successful for me as an assistant professor, is that he asked people to get in writing groups. And then the writing groups are to make your goals public and then to have the group hold you accountable. And that benefited me tremendously as an assistant professor because there were full professors in that group. And the last thing you want to do as an assistant professor is to tell a full professor you didn't meet your writing goals. At least in my mind, I was like, never going to happen. I am not going to look at them and they're going to look at me like not doing her job. And so we have actually done this with some of our graduate students. We have a mentoring group with them, and we make them put down writing goals. And when they don't, then we start to talk about why aren't you meeting this, and then we can get into what's going on. Are you not protecting your writing time? Are you not following through? And we try to get them to take the ownership with each other rather than the faculty and I having to do that. But the idea of setting goals, so I still set 2-week goals, and I don't like it when I don't meet them. I still protect my writing time and things like that, and that to me, that's why I think this book has a lot of great strategies, because I think the writing time and protecting it is huge, and also the ideas of setting goals. But obviously, the more that you can have public accountability, it's better than if you're just setting them for yourself.
How many hours, when you say a writing time, how many hours you usually write per week?
I usually do 2 to 2.5 hours each day that I set aside. That doesn't mean that's the only time I'm writing, but that's time that I say that I'm protecting. So typically I'm looking at 10 hours a week. That's protected. That doesn't mean that I'm only writing 10 hours a week, but that means that I am for sure writing 10 hours a week. I also do, a lot of things in the evenings after the kids go to bed. That's when I do a lot of my editing of graduate student work, because that's pretty easy to do places and things like that. So, which I also, view as kind of part of the writing. But again, I protect about, on average, a minimum of 10 hours a week. That's protected in my schedule.
What was the name of the author again?
Phonics is not my thing, so I'm going to guess it's Sylvia. Silvia. Paul. I always go by first name since I have a sounding out issue, but. And so one of the ways I balance is I can make justifications for the time I spend at home, because I say, I know that I've protected my writing time, and so at minimum, I've written 10 hours a week every day. And so I get done what I get done during that time, and then fill in with extras I have, and then I don't necessarily feel guilty about when I'm not writing at home.
Do you have times that you're sitting there for 2 hours but you can't get anything out?
I mean, sometimes I do sit there for a little while, but one of the ways I avoid that is I never have just one project going. I am not like I know people and they like I have to do this and then I move on. That I'm big into multitasking, and I think that's one of the reasons that I have had some success with publishing is that I never work on just one project. I have multiple things going. I don't put any of my eggs in one basket. So I typically have multiple projects going at one time. So if something's not going well on that, I save that, put it aside, and I open up something else. Because typically when I'm stuck, it's never across the board stuck. It's stuck on an idea. So I spend a couple minutes transitioning and then I can think openly. And so that I found has worked well for me. You're right. Nothing would be more frustrating to me than to sit there staring at something for 2 hours. So that's why if I get stuck and I'm like, I give it a little bit of time, and if I'm stuck, it's probably 10, 15 minutes, I don't have a lot of patience, I'm on to the next thing. And I'll figure I'll come back to another day. Also, when I get stuck staring at a computer, I'll get out paper and pencil. And I found that works really well for me. Because sometimes it's that idea of that blank page on the screen is just kind of that little cursor sticking staring at you. I'll literally get out paper and pencil, and I find that can open up ideas. So I can do that. Or if I feel like I don't want to waste my writing time, but I can't think of new things, I'll spend time reading it out loud to myself, hearing it and making edits, because that still is moving me forward, even if I'm stuck physically trying to compose words or to get words on paper. Just the idea of reading it out loud and editing it, then I feel like that has moved me forward and not wasting my time, but it allows me to kind of bypass that block for the day.
One of the things that I love that book very much, and he allows reading, not his own work, but reading articles in his writing time.
Yes.
Do you allow that? Because I feel like that is a kind of rabbit hole that if I go down, I could avoid writing forever by reading.
I do some. I think that is, and it's one of the big barriers to writing is that the excuse that people say, I just read one more article, I'll be able to write. And so I think that it is, you can read some, but I want to be able to see something. Whether it's scratch notes on a piece of paper, so it's, so if I read something, then what I might do is if I'm not ready to form it into a sentence or a paragraph, is actually take a piece of, paper, I have different notebooks, and then I'll actually scratch out what it says in my own words, and even if I don't know where it's going to be in the paper, I like that idea, and so I have something written down. So I'm like, okay, I took something away from that article, I wrote something related to it, and then I can hopefully build upon that.
Okay, can you talk about then, I know this is your system and everyone's going to do it differently, but one of the things I'm really struggling with is keeping things in order, either on my computer, in my head, in physical reality, So sometimes a journal, an article will say just one thing you really want to, just 2 words, that you just really want to remember from that article, and I how do you keep things straight? You said you have different paths, like.
Yeah, I have like a writing notebook and a research notebook. So everything.
Right.
But what I do is if I have a Word document, I actually was just working on something this morning where I was doing that, and I'll literally just I have some formed paragraphs and I wanted to take an idea from one article, but I didn't know where it fit yet. So I just put a couple returns, put in the sentence that I wanted with that citation, and just left it there and figured I'd figure out where it goes later. So I have it in the actual document, so I can't lose it. But I'm going to figure out where it fits later, but I want to keep that thought before I lose it with that document. Also, which is what I told some of my graduate students this week when we were talking about writing, is every time I write a new article, I create a new folder in my desktop. This is how I keep organized. And so all the articles that go with that, whatever I'm writing, go into that same folder. So I can actually have 10, 15 copies of the same article spread across my desktop, but they're in each of the different writing folders, so I never have to figure out where something is. Every article that's with that writing project is stored in that one folder that has all my drafts, all my articles, all my data, all the information I want is located right there, so I don't ever have to spend time looking, where's that article? I know where it is. It's in that folder for that writing project. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, very much.
So to go back to the balance, I guess the best thing I can do say is when I devote that time, then that's my time, and I feel like I've done things, and I don't have to feel guilty.
I'm not sure if Sylvia talks about it in his book, but in another book, like right to the top, it talks about like just writing whenever you have a good idea. So if you have like, you have your iPhone or something, you whip out your portable keyboard and type things up real quick. Do you do any of that, or is it? Do you really
I
just
don't.
stick to the writing time?
I stick to my writing time and then I write additional. When I'm in my office, I'll be right. If I don't have something else like a meeting I'm supposed to be doing or teaching, I'm writing.
Okay.
And that's because I firmly believe that the model of Research One institutions is publish or perish. And I actually enjoy writing. I think it's thrilling. Like, I always tell graduate students to submit because if you hit, I believe success breeds success, and I believe it's addicting. I believe getting something published becomes an addictive quality, and you want to keep doing it. I don't do that because that's just not feasible in my life. I don't want my kids seeing me at home pulling out a phone and doing something. To me, that's their time. So if an idea comes to me, hopefully it will stick. Hopefully if I have something close, I can jot on a Post-it note or something. But I often don't have access to the iPad or the iPhone to do that. And so I just gotta hope that they stick in my brain. That's just not where I'm at to have that flexibility.
I think that's important.
This is a very basic question.
There is no basics question when it comes to writing.
I'm just starting out, so it's very basic. So can you explain a little bit of the process? We've talked a lot about ideas and how you write and hitting the submit button. You mentioned rejoinder. I've never heard that word before. So can you tell me about after you hit submit, what do you expect to happen? Like timelines and that kind of thing. How
Okay.
long does it take them?
Well, on average, I think it takes journals about 3 months. And so this is one of the huge things for graduates as well as assistant professors to realize the actual time it takes to get something published. If you hear like assistant professors at Research One need to have 2 to 3 publications a year to feel safe, which was I was told, you can write something now and it might not get published for 2 years. And so that's something to keep in mind. I'm a firm believer in the pipeline. This was something one of my graduate school mentors told me is always have a pipeline in the sense that you have something in conceptualization, you have something you're actively working on, and you have something that's already in submission. And so if something goes into submission, you got to be working on something else and have another idea incubating. You have to generate a pipeline throughout all the things. The time that you collect data, if you're collecting data, write and get it published is tremendously long. I just got an email from a graduate student in another institution asking me about why don't I see more research on iPads? And I want to be like, because data was collected a year ago. iPads are just getting out. You have to get them out in the schools, and then by the time you collect the research, and then I'm like, it takes 2 years to publish anything. And so I'm pretty sure in 2014 you're going to see a whole crop of research on iPads, but that's the length of time you have to realize. When you submit, some editors will go through a first stage, so you can get rejected before it even goes to review. An editor can agree not to send it out to reviewers, so you need to be aware of that. Typically, if they send it out to reviewers, it can take 3 months to get a review back. One of the things I do is to keep organized because I have a lot going on, and so organization is key. Is I have what I call my writing process document, and I keep track. And so every time I submit something, I put it in an APA file, and I put the date it's submitted, and so where I submitted it to and the date. So in 3 months, I'm going to follow up if I haven't heard anything, and that's acceptable. If you haven't heard anything in 3 months, it's acceptable to contact the editor, and things like that. So I have a running list of everything that's been submitted, where it's been submitted, and the date it was submitted, and any information that I have, including like the manuscript number. And so when you get back, things can happen is you can get a flat-out acceptance, right? You can get acceptance with minor revisions, you can get a revise and resubmit, and then you can get like a rejection. So I always say revise and resubmits are celebrations. Anything other than rejection is celebration. You get a revise and resubmit, I'm like, let's have a ticker tape, parade. Let's celebrate, because somebody wants to see this again. And that is so much more valuable than someone saying they don't want to see that. And so the rejoinder letter comes into play with the revise and resubmits. You can do rejoinder letters just very simple, just here, we made the changes, I'm sending it back. I believe that if somebody's willing to look at it again and an editor's going to spend time, I'm going to try to prove to this editor what I did and why they should look at it again. I'm like, If I was an editor, I would want someone to spend the time to tell me so that I didn't have to go through their paper, perhaps, right? I'm like, save the editor time. I'm gonna make them happy. So that's the rejoinder letter where I pull out all the points that reviewers or the editor has said and explain how I met them or why I haven't met them. And so with revise and resubmits, that becomes a rejoinder letter.
How many times can we submit like for the same journal? I know like submit and then they may give us like review this again and then we may submit again and then like how many times and then they finally say reject or they accept the paper?
I mean, they can ask you to do as many times as you want. I mean, I haven't typically, not familiar with any more than doing 2. Like I've done 2 myself, and I know colleagues have done 2. Typically, it's a one-time revise and resubmit, and they'll make a decision. But there have been times, a couple times, where I have done 2 revisions, and then they've accepted it. I mean, the hard times are when you do 2 revisions and then they reject it, which, you know, happens. I mean, it happened to my husband, and he was like, I can't believe this editor. And I'm like, I know. There are also times, it's humans, people doing it. I mean, there have been, in editors, there are times that I submitted something where one reviewer said revise and resubmit, 2 said accept, and the editor rejected. And so you have to realize that the editor gets the final say. Reviewers are just there to help guide their decision, but they're not binding, and the editor, gets the final say, At that point, I did contact the editor, and he agreed to relook at it, and the same result happened, and he also rejected it. So that happens. That's just the name of the game. Reviewers ultimately get the ultimate control. So that's something that you should realize. So if an editor makes a suggestion, little caveat with my rejoinder letter, you probably need to make it. If it's philosophically different, then it may not be the journal, right? Reviewers are one thing, but if an editor tells you to do something and you don't do it, you have to realize how much power an editor actually has. Yes?
Some journals don't really have specific deadlines, so it could give you like less motivation, I think, because if there's no deadline.
You mean deadline for initial submission or deadline for revise and resubmit?
Initial submission.
Right.
Like a special issue on.
Or just all of the, well, most of the journals I submit to never have any deadlines. I don't submit to a lot of special issues. So, because special issues, some of them have open submissions, but a lot of times when it's a special issue, they know exactly who they're going to ask to write it, right? And they're asked to write it and things like that. So that's what I think is the huge thing, is that when you have to realize that as graduate students, somebody's typically holding something over you, right? They're giving deadlines, right? I know as a faculty member, my graduate students are writing stuff with me. I'm like, this is a deadline. You need to give it to me by this date. But on the other side, nobody has deadlines for you. Nobody tells me nobody looks over, nobody micromanages you. My department head isn't coming to me and asking me how many I've submitted or when I've submitted. So it's all the ownership and responsibility goes on to you. And so I think as graduate students, the more you can set deadlines for yourself and make them without someone holding you accountable, the more likely you are to continue that behavior. Habits are forming, whether they're good or bad habits. And if you're waiting to the last minute or waiting till someone else sets a deadline for you to write or to submit something, that's a behavior that you're gonna have as a problem. You're gonna have as an assistant professor when nobody's doing that. So journals typically are open. The deadlines come in with revise and resubmit, which they can give you 1 month or up to 3 months of revise and resubmit. Chapters. So a lot of times when I'm writing for deadlines, it's chapters, and those are usually, I always view them as non-negotiable. I know other faculty sometimes extend them. That's not a personal belief that I have. I believe if someone gives me a deadline and asks me to do something, it is my responsibility to make that deadline no matter what. So chapters are usually chapters and grants are the only things that I write with deadlines. Otherwise, it's my own values, my own priorities of when I submit. So my goal, I always set up a schedule, usually in August when I come back and report, and I say, okay, here's all the writing projects in my head. And I usually map it out for myself. Okay, September, my goal is to submit this. In October, my goal is to submit this. In December, and I try to think about, my philosophy is to think about things monthly. I feel like if I'm submitting something a month, whether it's a chapter or an article, then on average, if 25 to 50% of those hit, I'm looking at my 3 a year. So I use the idea of 25% of what I write hits, then I will get my 3 a year. If more than that does, great. But if I'm submitting once a month, and I get acceptance at a 25% rate, I'm going to get to my 3. so that the idea of out timelines really becomes our own ability to regulate and to have that discipline to do it on for ourselves. And that's a huge part of what writing is having that self-discipline.
I have a quick question. Something you said just made it pop into my head. It may not be so typical for graduate students, but it seems to be really typical, at least in certain fields, that professors end up doing edited books. And you talked about doing chapters and having this deadline. I mean, I'm co-editing a book, the second volume. We've already done the first one with my advisor, and some people you want to write, and so you're just going to be accommodating, and some people you probably, like maybe their chapter is not really super important. So from that side of things, I mean, do you have any experience in terms of being that person in imposing deadlines on others?
Not beyond people that I could control, like
like graduate students?
like graduate students,
Right. Yeah, not like colleagues, right?
Right. I just believe in punctuality, and so to have it not do it, probably I as an editor, I don't think I can't tolerate that very much.
Right, and I think people probably want to write with people who meet deadlines.
I always say I want to be the type of writer that's the co-author, anything that I myself want.
Yeah.
So when I'm writing with something, I always make sure I'm meeting my deadlines, because I'm like, I don't want something to be held up because of me. Just like with my graduate students, I say I have a 2-week turnaround, I will get it back to you, because I don't want to be the reason why you're held up, because I realize that I now have tenure, I have a little bit more protection than you, who needs to get all these in the pipeline to be able to become assistant professor and to be able to get tenure.
You just mentioned co-authoring. Can you just describe what that's like, or what your experience has been with that?
Yeah, so co-authoring, can work really well if you pick people that have similar writing styles or similar writing values in terms of making deadlines. I think it's when you pick people whose writing is very different in terms of making deadlines or prioritizing, that becomes the challenge. And it a lot of times depends on what side you're on, in the sense that when I'm writing with graduate students, I have a lot more to be able to hold them accountable. When I'm writing with colleagues, I have nothing to hold them accountable, typically, you know what I mean? You typically enter into an agreement that you're going to work on this together. And so if someone holds you up, I mean, you can threaten to take them off, but there's the idea of how much is it their work, and that becomes very challenging. I think I think that when you collaborate with people, you can get a lot more done. If you look at the really productive people, and I look at the really productive people in my field because that's the area I look at, and a lot of them, they're married couples that are both in special ed. I'm not even kidding. And what they do is they write together. And they take turns, right? Why? Because 2 people can write faster than 1 person does. Okay. I wish that I would do more collaborating, because I think that I could be more productive if I had more people to write with. Because if you're responsible for the whole thing, you're responsible for the whole thing. It all rests with you. But if you're writing with somebody else, that's like 2 people doing the work of what 1 person normally does. And I think that that can be well, as long as you, again, have that same writing philosophy. I think that collaborating as graduate students, collaborating as assistant professors, you can work smarter. And I'm a big fan of hard work. I am not at all shy away from hard work, but my motto is trying to teach people how to work smarter, not harder. Because most people are working as hard as they possibly can. So how is it that you can work smarter? And I think trying to collaborate with people, work smarter. One is the idea that the notion of single authorship isn't as big a deal anymore, right? It's more about first authorship. So as long as you alternate and take turns with sharing first authorship, that's what's important. The single authorship doesn't take the value. Second, collaboration, interdisciplinary work, that is much more valuable than it used to be even 10 years ago. So that notion of the single author, not as big. What's huge is first authorship, and then the idea that you can collaborate with people. And I know that writing with graduate students, when you become a faculty member, is something that is highly rewarded and valued. And then we'll hear, and then we'll go.
Okay, so as for the co-authoring, in our area, we are doing qualitative research. Then if I work with 2 more people, then writing about our experience, I think each of us has different writing style. For publishing, is that okay? Like for reviewer might think like they have a different writing style.
You're going to have to integrate to have one voice.
Okay.
A paper has to come down to one voice. So typically who's ever the first author, is going to have to do the editing to make it sound like one voice.
Mhm.
So even if you do have co-authors, there has to be a sense that it's cohesive.
Mm.
You know what I mean? So that is going to be a challenge, is to making it sound like there's one voice. And that's typically then the idea of the first author. So when I write as graduate students in their first author, I'm like, I'm editing, I'm writing, I'm providing my contributions, but you are responsible for the voice and to making this sound how you want it to sound, because it's your piece. You are first author. I think, and I really try to value the idea of what does it mean to be first author, what does it mean to be a second author, what does it mean to be a third author, and things like that. Does that help at all?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So is there a big difference, like if there are 2 authors, co-authors, or 5 co-authors, that doesn't matter?
Yeah.
Well,
My question.
I mean, once you get past one, it doesn't really matter.
Well, if you get something crazy, it just looks
Right.
stupid.
Right. And it's odd, because in education, like, we do have this notion of, sure, in science, you
Yeah.
get like 20 people in the
It's
lab.
like every
person
single
is the most
person in the
important
lab.
one.
Yeah.
Right. So I think it's the idea of also the idea, what's realistic. Who made a contribution. You should also note that there is the possibility to have 2 first authors if you have a little note and it's actually true that both equally contributed. You can have a little footnote and it can be that both authors contributed equally to this and should be considered first author. So you need to be, that is something that can be done. I always kind of defer to AP. I know it sounds like a cop-out, but in terms of authorship. Typically, it's myself and one graduate student, maybe 2. That's typically how we work. If I have an undergraduate, I believe that they do make valuable contributions, and I always add them. And I have upfront conversations with students on projects or writing projects before we begin. Whether it's research or writing, I have a very upfront conversation. I don't think it's the place for the graduate student to have to initiate that, because I know that there's a power dynamic, and so I always initiate. And I say, this is my idea, and I'm asking you to write with me, therefore I'm first author. You have an idea and you bring it to me, but you want me to work with you, you are first author. And then if we involve an undergraduate research trainee, which we sometimes do, I say, I believe that this individual at this point has warranted enough that we're going to include them, and you need to realize that this is going to be a third author. But I always think that it's important to have those conversations about authorship. And if people aren't, you need to have that understanding yourself of where your authorship lies. And I think that that's important to know that first authorship is valued, and that is something that you should definitely strive to achieve. And speaking as someone who did searches last year as a search chair, it's something we did look for. We want to see, and when thinking about, as you guys think about applying for jobs, at a research one, wanted to see that someone was writing as a first author, because that meant that it was their idea and they had what it takes to get a publication as that first author. Authorship order matters. And as a search chair, I wanted to see that you could have a first authorship paper, because that meant you knew what it took to get from here all the way to publication and see it through.
You said there's a power dynamic between professors and students. There's not a power dynamic between students and students.
Right.
And I mean, I sort of feel like there's obviously an upfront conversation about who does the bulk of the work would be appropriate, but there's the bulk of the work like 2010, and there's the bulk of the work like 55-45. I mean, do you have any
I think it's
advice?
if you feel like it was a pretty much equal contribution, you can add that little footnote. And there are plenty of people who publish with that little footnote.
Okay.
Also, if I publish with someone regularly, like we have this deal and we're like, okay, we'll flip the coin, and then every other time we're going to alternate.
Right.
Right, so we start off by flipping the coin, and we realize like this is an ongoing relationship. We're going to continuously publish together.
Yeah.
So let's have a mature, we either flip the coin because we're like both of us, and then we just alternate every other paper, or I have one colleague here at Purdue, we just basically say, this aligns a little more with your research area, so you take this one, and then the next one kind of aligns a little bit more with you, and we just kind of have those conversations. But we have a really good working relationship, and we just have very honest conversations, where she's like, you're going up tenure, let's put you first here, and then, things like that, and then the next time will be mine. And that happens faculty to faculty, but you have to have those good working relationships. As a graduate student, we just basically said, let's start off flipping a coin, and then we'll alternate from then on out. And that's what we have done.
Sounds good.
So, I mean, not the best thing, but it has worked for us.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So there's that balance. I think that's the key, is that you don't want to be always stuck in the second author role if you're making an equal contribution. Other things, I've tried to look at my list. I think I've tried to hit all my notes. I hope I've answered the questions you guys. Yeah, I'm not trying to cut you off. I just, go ahead.
But for the dissertation, is it okay to stop me before we defend the dissertation, or is it normally after?
That is something you need to ask to your
Depends.
chair. I would think that if you put together a committee that actually does what a committee is supposed to do, you will get a much stronger product if you wait for them, right? Because you think, it's not just me. I have like 4 people who have PhDs that are going to give me input to make this stronger. That's my philosophy. Like, they're here to make this as strong as I can be. I mean, nobody wants to produce PhDs that they don't believe are putting out the best work that they possibly can, in my idea. So I would think that your paper would be stronger if you took the input of the 4 people that you've chosen to give you that input. That's my philosophy, but that would definitely be a question for your chair, because everyone handles that differently. Like, I mean, with our prelims, and I know that each department is different, our program area requires students to do 3 independent projects before their dissertation. And we try to put them as authentic, so not just doing something for the sake of doing it, but like I make students do studies, or I make them write, you know, a position paper, I make them write a practitioner piece that, you know, I'm based on something that we've done together, and things like that. And I say, those I have no problem with you submitting before the prelim defense, because that's one-on-one with each faculty. So I'm like, hey, if it's done, don't let this prelim defense hold you up. Get it in the pipeline.
You mentioned earlier a systematic review of the literature as opposed to a regular review. Can you explain
Yeah.
that?
So a systematic review is where there's actually like a research rigor to it. So there's ways in which you go about and you put in keywords and you scan and find all the articles that meet your criteria with keywords, and then you do an actual hand search, which now no longer that means have to go into the library, but looking at each journal issue one by one to see if any articles meet your criteria, and then doing an ancestral search, which looking at all the references in the accepted articles you have to find additional ones.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very much like, I'm going to talk about, here's the breadth of the field. So, for example, like at my student, I looked at mathematical interventions for students with mild intellectual disability, and we did a systematic review. What has been done between this time period and this time period? So like in the 20 years, let's say, between 1992 and 2002, 1992 and 2012, let's do it. And we did that systematically. So we can say, here's what we know in the last 20 years that has been done in this area. And that to make it systematic. And that's more likely to get published than just reviews, because we can talk about, this is all the literature, and we can make then, the discussion becomes very rich, because we can make inferences and implications based on the little or vast amount of research that exists. If you're looking at just a literature review, then I think the better route to go, in my opinion, is to do a position paper, because you're putting out a position and then using all the literature that you can find to support that, if that makes sense. I mean, the chapter 2 of your dissertations getting published is probably not extremely likely, because they don't necessarily add much. But if you're taking it and doing a systematic, or to take what you do in chapter 2, right, and to form a position and use your chapter 2 literature to support your position, there's ways to make chapter 2 more authentic than just this huge thing you have to do. Yes.
Okay, so you said the keyword within a particular range, I got that, and then mining the bibliographies of the ones that you choose. But then you said go journal by journal.
It's called a hand search.
What would that sounds like that would take 20 years.
No. So you pick particular journals. So like if I'm in I'm going to pick particular journals that I think are more likely to publish these. So I've done my keyword search and my, my databases. And then I'm picking particular journals that I think are likely to publish this. And I search issue by issue within that time frame. So whether it's 10 years or, you know what I mean? I mean, electronically now it's great. I mean, in the old days you have to go to the library and have you ever been to the stacks?
Yes.
Oh my God! First of all, they're freaky here. I gotta tell you, the stacks here freak me out. I'm alone there, and I'm like, I'm climbing up some weird stairs. So they just kind of freak me out. Yeah. You get on every issue. I've done that. Okay, I've done a historical systematic review to figure out if we've forgotten what we already knew. Think about if you don't have anything to write about. Figure out. I think that's great. Well, figure out what we forgot, what we already knew, because I think we do that quite a bit. right? But nowadays you can just go on the little electronic journals and you just look at each issue and you read the abstract, and does it meet the criteria that you set? The best way to write a systematic review is to read some that are published in your areas and journals that are likely to publish them, right? Don't reinvent the wheel. When I first started doing this, I literally took a couple systematic reviews, I read them in depth, I made notes about what they did, and then I did that. I was like, well, these people got published, they're clearly doing something right. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel, I'm going to do exactly what they have done, you know what I mean, the same procedures, and that's more likely to resolve, you know. I think, again, not reinventing the wheel. People have done things before. Working that smarter, not harder, becomes the idea of taking what something has done and trying to reproduce it. Just like when students tell me they're going to write something, I'm like, read examples of that. So in my class, I'm having students write practitioner pieces. I'm like, don't come talk to me until you've read a couple articles in that journal you want to submit to, because otherwise this conversation is fruitless. If you don't know what's typically done, I can't help you. We have to start from a basic conversation that gives an indication that you know what's expected in the outlet you're publishing to.
All right, are there any other questions or for Dr. Bouck? Okay, well, we're going to respect her writing time and ours. So please help yourself to any food on the way out, but let's thank Dr. Bouck.
Oh, and I should say also that the Curriculum and Instruction Graduate Student Association has started a writing group, which has the misnomer of Journal Club, because nobody would change the name. So, but that is what it is based on, and that meets Wednesdays from 2:30 to 3:30. But it's about setting goals and being accountable.
And if I can provide anyone with anything, I'm very open with sharing things. So I share rejoinder letters with people. I'm happy to share that. I share them with my graduate students. I'm like, again, don't reinvent the wheel. If you want to see what I've done, I'm happy to share that kind of stuff with people. I believe that I'm not into keeping things private. I think those are all open information. I'm happy to share things. So.
Also, did you guys mention the GSEC, the social justice writing group?
No, talk about it, Mike.
Marshall, why don't you talk about it?
We have a social justice research group meeting bi-weekly tomorrow from 10 to 12 o'clock in the 212, I believe, basement of Beering, so just down the way there. We are doing research that is concerned with social justice issues. So, for example, I work with English language learners in the classroom. So, if you want to get involved with any social justice issues, and if you're doing any research in that area, it would be great if you could come out and just use that time as a chance to collaborate, or just to have writing time and just stay what's the word? Motivated.
Inspired.
No, that's not the
Excited.
word. That's not the word. Anyway. So yeah, please come
On
out
track.
and
On top.
write with us. Stay on top of your research, and make some partnerships, and maybe we can collaborate and do some journal articles. So, research. All right.
All right.
Can I
Thanks.
just say, if you guys have not seen this book, I highly recommend it if you're going into academia. What they didn't teach you in graduate school, 199 helpful hints for success in your academic career. It's a really, really quick read because it's literally like hints. I have a copy, and I'm happy to lend that out as long as I get it back. I really like this book and use it in my graduate courses because it's things probably be helpful before you leave graduate school.
Right.
One more plug. Sorry, GSEC is also having a small tea hour with a scholar from Akita University from Japan, Hidehiro Endo. He'll be coming to speak with us about his research and his experience as a graduate student at Purdue, and now his experience as an international scholar. And that will be on Monday from 3 o'clock in the 4th floor Beering conference room on Monday. So if you have time, please come. Thank you.
All right, there's plenty of food. Please help yourself.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for.
Oh, no, no.